But in this parish, as in many parishes, that movement from pastoral size to program size stalls out. The church I was in previously is an excellent example of this. Emmanuel Harrisonburg had been approximately the same size for 30 years. 30 years, same size, although the town doubled during that time period. The average Sunday attendance, which is always the key number in church size. Membership is not, because membership is defined differently in different places. Average Sunday attendance is where the rubber hits the road. At Emmanuel Harrisonburg, they were between 140 and 190 every year for 30 years. And the pattern was up and down, up and down. It's quite cyclical. What parishes do is they'll grow up to a certain size, and then they'll find, well, now we're not comfortable here because I don't have a relationship with the rector, so they'll go somewhere else. And then the attendance will go down, and they'll rise and fall and rise and fall. That's happened here, too, to a certain degree. I don't think that's what's primarily driving changes in attendance, but it is a factor. And looking at the numbers, looking at the financing of this church, is probably not sustainable as a pastoral-sized church in this space, not without a radical change in the use of the space. So that's what strategic planning has to wrestle with. They have to think very hard and carefully about this. How can we, what are we called by God to be in this place? So it goes back to the work of the discernment team. And then they came up with, we want to feed God's people. Well, how can we best feed God's people? And what are the implications of that for church growth, if any? Those are questions that will be on the table when the strategic planning team meets with you all who wish to meet with them. It'll be a very important piece of input for you to give them. Okay.
Can you say a few more words about what would seem to be pretty obvious, the distinction between being a suburban and an urban church? I would guess that most people who come to St. George's would say, we're an urban church because we have all these tall buildings around us, but clearly it's more complicated than that.
Sure, an urban church by context, definitely. The suburban church is more likely to do a program that is for its own members. That's where the primary focus is going to be. And the urban church is going to have more programming for its context. That's an artificial kind of distinction, because any church can have either focus. Either church can have either focus. A suburban church tends to have parking lots. That's an important distinction. A parking lot enables midweek programming. Used to. Used to. Suburban churches, therefore, have an easier time having midweek programming, which is hard for us here because of parking issues. So, those are some of the distinctions. It has to do with the focus of the ministry. And very importantly, the use of the building. Let me give you a simple example about building use. I just was walking around the neighborhood in Baltimore where my wife's apartment is, which is in Charles Village, if you know the area. And there are several churches. Right? You can walk in any direction past 2 or 3 churches. And obviously those are churches in an urban context. Some of them are just plain closed up. Nothing's happening. You can't see anything that's happening. But there's one that's about 2 blocks from where she lives. And this place is full of programs. Yoga, Tai Chi, study groups, AA groups, and so on, every day, all day long. Now, we have a fair number of evening meetings here with outside groups, but we're barely scratching the surface of that. And certainly most of the building stands empty all week long. And of course, our largest single room, the church itself, we only use for a few hours a week. We do share that with an Ethiopian congregation, and that's a good thing. But it's still 6 days a week that it's not used. So the urban church usually has to look at that for financial reasons at the very least, just because it becomes part of the mission to be a good neighbor in your context, in your rather close-knit urban context, to say, we have this resource here, this physical plant. How can we make that available to the community in a responsible way, in a way that helps us by way of rent income, and a way that also nourishes the people in our community? How can we do that? So those are some distinctions between urban and suburban.
I have a question for you. If we start if we start programs of a secular nature, like yoga, exercise, say dance hall, how in your wife's neighborhood, how do the local secular people feel about the competition as far as space is concerned?
The competition?
The competition from the secular activity in the church. How does the secular business community relate to that competition?
Oh, well, the kinds of things that the church would host, or that a teacher might book space for, are the kinds of things that are fairly low on the food chain economically. So they're not going to be competing for space at a higher. They're not just not competing for space at a higher level. That's just not possible. It's just. I mean, you can go to a yoga class that would be very fancy and be very expensive, but most people, certainly in that neighborhood, would not. That neighborhood is, as you know, it is largely students, graduate students included, but also some professors. It's a little different from here. And I don't know how that would, I have no idea what would play out here, if anything. I have no idea. We don't have any market study, I don't know if we do.
I mean, in regard to that, it seems like the point of doing it is to fill a need in the community. So, if you've got Gold's Gym, you're not going to try and recreate Gold's Gym. So, I mean, I think that would be the kind of decisions that would be made. What does the community want? What is missing? What is not accessible? That's what presumably we would hope to provide.
Right. We're clearly doing a good job with AA and 12-step programs in general. We've got a slew of them, different kinds, different times, different days. But they don't generate a lot of income.
Can I ask, in light of like some of the stuff, if you said we're kind of scratching the surface, I mean, I do know that we have some secular activities that are going on here already. How, if we increase that number, and I know we're not really discussing here whether to do that or not, but
right.
That being said, I have just some concerns now being here on Thursday nights for the children's choir when, I know that there's AA going on as well, but I also see people in the building who I don't think are here for AA. But then when we leave, when the children's choir leaves, then the only people left in the building are not St. George's members.
Right.
Is there, do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, so we're relying on them to make sure that the building is locked up and empty. Because there could be people that aren't here for the meeting and that are just here in the building.
That's right.
So do we look at then having security here?
Yes.
If we go,
we would have to have an employee who was here on the premises. We rely on the Ethiopian congregation has meetings midweek, Thursdays included. That's probably
that's right, I've seen them here. No, but it's not.
They're very responsible people.
Right, right. And I recognize a lot of them from seeing them
sure.
afternoon.
And they take some ownership in this, and they've been a good tenant. They've been a very good tenant. But clearly, if you open your building up that way, you then have to think about security in a different way. Yes, we'd have to have more sexton level staff.
Sure.
Yes. Hopefully, that would be covered by the income.
The income, that's what I'm thinking, because that's an added expense.
That's the theory. Sure. And again, I'm not proposing this. I'm simply saying the church is going to have to come to some conclusion because the current system is not sustainable. I'm fairly confident.